Yeah.
So they stack up these frequencies, and it's in between those frequencies that they can be kept suspended in some way, and then move somewhere.
So then they said, we know the frequency of the destination. So every destination has a particular frequency that it radiates. So once you know the frequency of the destination, then the ship itself, which is an organic structure, aims for that frequency. So everything focuses itself on that destination, and then you just go there. You just arrive there. It's not that you're actually burning fuel and traveling. You're dialing in, this is where we want to end up. And the job of a pilot on their ship is to make sure that there is no alteration to the destination frequency.
So this is really important, John Paul, and I want to bring it up. I don't really want to go down this alley, or this path, but I need to bring it up for people to start preparing themselves for what is most likely one of the biggest lies that we've been told, and that is what space is all about. What is space? We know very little about space. All we know about space is what we learn from NASA and the space agencies that are all funded by the big money people and the global elite. And it has become very clear and very evident to me, and I have overwhelming evidence for this, not just from my own research, but from people I've spoken to as well, that space is not what we think it is. And at this stage, it's very likely that what we call space is actually filled with water. The entire space is actually water. It might be water in a different state, not H2O, but H3O2 or whatever other form of water that you can. We're only scratching the surface of the knowledge of what water is and how it can morph and form different phases of water. And what we do know, absolutely do know, is that NASA has been telling us for at least 30 years that space is filled with water. There's water everywhere in space. Now, if this is new to you, if you've not heard this before, then please watch one of my lectures, but I'll be doing a lot more presentations on this. And they've been saying this, putting this out over and over in press releases, how much water there is, and, supercluster galaxies shooting out bullets of water, and water from Orion, and water at the edge of our solar system, that our entire solar system is surrounded by water. I mean, this is relatively new. This is relatively new information. I think like 2 years ago, maybe not even that far back, but like a year ago, main news bulletin from NASA. But unless you go and research this, unless people go and research this, mainstream news will never focus on this, because they're focusing on the politics and the propaganda to keep the political regimes in power. That's all we see is politics and bullshit on TV and on the news. So unless you go looking for this, or you have an interest in what NASA is discovering, you're not going to know this. So there is no question that space is most likely filled with water. And I have never spoken to anyone that claims they've been to Mars or any other planet or anywhere else other than Earth. No one has ever said they fly in a spaceship to get there. They always say, and it's probably half a dozen people that have reasonably good credentials that claim they've been to other planets. And they always say, no, they go through a wormhole or a Stargate or a jump room, or they've got all these different words and names for it.
Yep.
And the industrial military complex calls it a jump room. You go into this little room, it feels like a little cubicle with special things, and it closes, and there's a weird thing that happens, a pressurization or whatever, and then boom, and you get out and you somewhere else on another planet, another reality. So this is very similar to, this is really important to contemplate, that space is most likely not what we've been shown in science fiction movies. Mm-hmm. This is why science fiction movies are so popular and so big, and so much money is spent on science fiction movies, because it's actually disinformation propaganda about space. And most of us believe Star Wars and Star Trek and all that. And that's what we believe it to be. So to even suggest to anyone that you can't really travel through space in a jet-propelled rocket ship, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work.
Nope.
That's a long stretch for a lot of people to even go there. So I'm just preparing you for what is a huge shift in coming to terms with the depth of the lies and the deceptions that we've been fed for so many years and well over a century now about, space movies and sci-fi movies and space and all that. It's incredible. So these guys obviously created these teleportation devices or jump rooms or stargates or whatever, and spaceships. You call it a spaceship, but it's really more like a jump room, because because the Anunnaki, from what I understand, didn't really have. Well, I guess they did have temples and things like that. So no, that would be a wrong statement to make, that they didn't have buildings. They did have buildings. That they had some temples and buildings that they would live in. But I also look, that's a whole nother debate. Like their ships, were they ships physical just because so that it contain and generate and contain the frequency that they needed, and it was within that frequency that they then moved around? Otherwise, it's difficult to do these leaps between places. And then in this density on our Earth, they would use small craft that work with our gravity, work with our air and our air pressure, with our gravity. So they use the nature of reality on Earth as we know it, the air and the atmosphere and the water. They use that to create spacecraft that can navigate, generate levitation energy fields, so they can navigate and very rapidly move around Earth without having to create complex machines or systems with which to teleport to places around the Earth, because that could, I guess, be far more complicated than just having a spacecraft that can travel really, really fast without friction and so forth, like literally travel around the world in a minute. That kind of. Yeah. We know that technology exists already. We know that the industrial military complex is working with these gravity generating devices that literally, when they move, or planes or craft, whatever you want to call them, when they move, they don't experience friction, because they create an environment free of gravity and free of friction and can move incredibly fast. So this is really important to start putting these things into context. So when you hear that kind of information, how they stack frequencies together, and again, if you as a shaman or a receiver of this information, if you're not a scientifically minded person, or you don't know the science and the physics behind it, it wouldn't make any sense. So, luckily it made sense to you because you've been exposed to this, and you and I have been hanging out, so I've shared the stuff with you. So it made a lot more sense to you. But if you hadn't had that prior knowledge, you would have gone, no, this is all garbage and rubbish. This can't be normal. This can't be real. I'm possibly hearing the wrong things. And I think that happens a lot with channelers and shamans and people like you that have the ability to connect with these other beings.
Well, that's why I try to record things, because I don't, so I recorded that they had these stacks of frequencies. So I record what they say, because whether it makes sense to me or not, let's record this so that it's preserved, so that when we have this chat, you go, oh, yeah. That's, and I think that's the cool thing. And I think that, from my understanding, the way that it works for me is that they occupy my memories. They have access to everything I've ever thought, everything I see. So sometimes when they're trying to explain a concept, they'll show me images of something like it, or they'll use some reference that I have. But in this conversation that we're talking about now with Brant, he's a motorcycle designer and car dude. And so he knows all about this fuels and chemistry and stuff. So quite often he would ask a question, and they would have to say, John Paul doesn't have anything in his vocabulary, in his memory, that can help. So just ask yes or no questions. We can give you we can answer yes or no questions, but we can't explain a concept because John Paul doesn't have that vocabulary or that understanding. And I think that's great.
Yes or no questions are actually the easiest and the best way to get to a deeper comprehension of what it is you want to understand. Because you can say, you can ask, is it a physical object? Yes or no? Well, yes, it's a little physical, but it operates within multidimensional space. Or I don't know. Was it human? No. Yes. And I know because I've done some channelings where I had like 100 questions prepared. There were simply yes or no answers. And that always got me a lot more information in the channeling session than if you just let the being that you're talking to waffle and tell you stuff, because then they often get stuck and they go on long, tedious explanations that have very little meaning to someone like me or whoever else is receiving the information.
Yep.
Yes to no questions. I like that a lot.
Yeah.